Hey, what's up guys, Will here for GSM Arena. This is Sony's new Xperia 10 III. Mark III. And it looks pretty much exactly the same as last year's Xperia 10 Mark II. There's more going on here besides the looks though, so let's dive in and see what's new in our full review. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, said Sony probably. The new Xperia 10 brings the same squared-off, glossy look as last year's model, with Gorilla Glass 6 protection and a polycarbonate frame. Although the Mark III is a little heavier, it still brings a pretty lightweight form factor. They're so similar. I'll admit, I had to double check a few times to keep track of which phone was which. You even get the same premium IP68 rated water resistance, even though the Xperia 10s are mid-rangers, not flagships. On the front is a 6-inch OLED screen with a tall 21:9 aspect ratio, a 1080p resolution, and Gorilla Glass 6 protection. The bezels are a little thinner this year, but the difference isn't night and day. Despite the popular trends, Sony hasn't bumped up the refresh rate this time around. You get the standard 60Hz. This display is decent. Of course, the sharpness is good, and you get the deep blacks typical of OLED technology, as well as HDR support. But sunlight legibility leaves more to be desired, as max brightness is on the lower side for this type of panel. 350 nits with the manual slider, and 560 nits in auto mode when in bright conditions. Colors can be tweaked to be fairly accurate. There is a quirky interaction with the colors which is worth mentioning. If you have the video image optimization setting turned on, the screen will visibly switch color schemes when you open or close a video playing app such as YouTube or Netflix. It can be pretty distracting. For audio, the Xperia 10 Mark III has a single front-facing speaker down at the bottom, which just begs to be paired with a second one for a stereo setup. Oh well. Just like the one on the previous Xperia 10, this speaker scored just an average rating on our loudness charts. The audio quality is decent but not great, with some noticeable low end, but mids and highs which lack presence. You do get a headphone jack too for plugging in your traditional headphones, or if you want to connect wireless headphones, there's support for LDAC, Sony's high-res wireless audio. Waking up and unlocking the Xperia 10 Mark III is done with a side-mounted fingerprint scanner / power button. It definitely isn't the fastest or most responsive we've used lately. The interface of the Xperia 10 Mark III is a very stock-looking Android 11, which brings a few extra functions from Sony on top. The home screen, app drawer, notification shade, and task switcher all look quite vanilla. One feature that's a bit out of the ordinary is a multi-window switch. It basically gives you two task switchers stacked on top of each other, one for each side of the split screen. And besides those apps already open, there are also paired app shortcuts here too for easy access. Speaking of shortcuts, SideSense is a menu accessible at the edge of the screen. This gives you a customizable space to place shortcuts for apps and functions, and you even get a widget here to control Sony headphones with. And finally, you get Sony's proprietary music app on board. Other media will be handled by Google's apps by default. Overall, you have 128 gigs of storage on board the Xperia 10 Mark III, which is expandable via microSD. At the heart of the phone is a Qualcomm Snapdragon 690 chipset, built on an 8nm process. It's a significant step up from last year's chipset, both in performance and in the fact that it provides 5G connectivity. But with that said, while performance is solid here, it still falls behind the majority of mid-range competitors at this price, which run on Snapdragon 700 series chips. It can stand its ground in CPU benchmarks with scores that fall just a bit behind the competition. But in graphics tests, there's a much wider gap. This is still enough power to run your everyday tasks and less demanding games without a hitch, and we didn't notice any excessive heating or thermal throttling here. One of the major upgrades the Mark III brings over last year is a larger 4500 mAh battery, and it does a great job. Battery life is excellent, with a score of 137 hours in our proprietary tests. However, we have to talk about the charging speed. Our unit came with just a 7.5 watt charger in the box. I suppose these days we should be thankful we even got a charger, but really? With it, we were able to charge the phone from 0 to just 20% in half an hour. We tried using a fast 65 watt power delivery charger too, and got 37% in the same amount of time. Still not very speedy. The Xperia 10 Mark III has 3 cameras on the back, a 12 megapixel main cam, an 8 megapixel ultra wide, and an 8 megapixel 2x telephoto cam. It's all pretty similar to what we saw on last year's model. But even so, this is quite a versatile setup for this price, where telephoto cameras are hard to find. During the day, 12 megapixel photos from the main cam are adequate for the class. There's a good level of detail, well-controlled noise, and likable colors. The shots tend to come out underexposed though, and if HDR doesn't kick in, you'll end up with some harsh highlights. Portrait shots are taken with the main cam, and these have nice looking skin tones and competent subject separation. But since the phone prioritizes the exposure for the subject, you can end up with a blown out background in some scenes. Shots from the ultra-wide cam hold up well against the competition. They have good sharpness and detail is excellent for the 8 megapixel resolution. Dynamic range is wide for this class, and we like the exposure here better than on the main camera. 2x zoomed photos from the telephoto camera have respectable sharpness and detail, and wide enough dynamic range. The color rendition doesn't match the other cameras though. For example, the skies are shifted towards purple. The Xperia 10 Mark III tends to struggle a bit after the sun goes down. While shots from the main cam have good color saturation in areas with more light, overall the photos are underexposed and soft, with limited dynamic range. Turning on night mode helps a lot, salvaging blown highlights and opening up the shadows. These are a little bit softer though. All the points we mentioned about the main camera are also true of the ultra-wide, only even more so. These are quite underexposed with narrow dynamic range and an overall softness. In a similar way, night mode improves things dramatically and gets you better development in the highlights and shadows. Sharpness seems unaffected here. At the 2x zoom setting, in most cases at night you'll be getting a crop from the main cam. When it does manage to acquire focus, it captures passable images, but with very narrow dynamic range. Again, we'd prefer the night mode output for 2x zoomed in shots because of its better dynamic range, even if it does tend to smooth out textures and detail a little bit. Now on to selfies taken with the 8 megapixel front-facing cam. We'd describe these as unremarkable. Colors are overall muted, and there isn't a ton of fine detail. Dynamic range is okay though, and you get good exposure on your face even in relatively challenging light. The Sony Xperia 10 Mark III records video in up to 4K at 30 FPS with its main camera. This footage is okay for the class, with good detail levels and excellent colors, but dynamic range is average, and these are a little bit on the soft side. To get video from the telephoto, you'll need to be in 1080p resolution. It has plenty of sharpness and detail, but the colors are a bit off, just like with the still photos. The ultra-wide is also capped at 1080p. There's good detail, saturated colors, and the exposure is brighter than on the main cams. Dynamic range is decent, but not spectacular. Video stabilization is available in all modes. We did notice some annoying focus hunting in 4K, but other than that, EIS does a decent job of compensating for camera shake. So that's the Xperia 10 Mark III. You get a compact and lightweight design with IP-rated water resistance. The cameras are quite versatile for the class, and compared to last year's model, you get a larger battery with great battery life and a more powerful chipset with 5G support. However, there are a few things to be critical of here. The charger we got with the phone is kind of a joke, and even with a larger one, charging speed is still slow. The display is just 60Hz and not the brightest, and you'll find competitors at this price with faster chipsets, stereo speakers, and better low-light photos and selfies. If those features are important to you, it might be worth it to shop around. Thanks for watching guys, stay safe and see you on the next one.